Welcome in, Dog Nation. I'm Kaylee Mansell with Sarah Spencer, who was boots on the ground tonight in Athens as Georgia baseball defeats Liberty 6-1 to take the Athens Regional. But it did not come without some drama. Midway through the game, Tre Phelps was ejected for disrespectful celebration after his go-ahead home run, which in turn we saw Wes Johnson also get ejected for standing up for Tre Phelps. Now, Tre Phelps will be suspended for one game. That cannot be appealed. But do we have a status update on what happens with Wes Johnson? And you had the chance to hear from him in the post-game press conference. What were his comments about the ejection?
Yeah, so Wes Johnson, he won't face any other disciplinary measures. So he'll be good to coach in super regionals. Tre Phelps is going to have to sit for a game, which is a pretty big blow for Georgia. But yeah, I mean, I think Wes is kind of sticking up for his guy in that situation.
For the record, Tre's family was sitting up in the stands. Tre was waving at his family. The umpires, whatever, I'm not an umpire. They thought he was talking to the dugout. Tre got ejected. We let our players express themselves. I mean, who's going to tell a player he can't wave to his family?
Did the umpires tell you it was just about the dugout, nothing else about running the bases? Any other conversation?
Yeah, guys, I can't speak for the umpires, and I'm gonna stand up for them. And I just wanted some explanation. I didn't like what I heard, and yeah, I mean, I understand the rules, so yeah, I'm not gonna, whatever the umpires got to do what they got to do. But I'm gonna always, if I think something's wrong, I'm gonna stand up for our players no matter what.
Whether you agree with that, whether you think Tre was celebrating too much rounding the bases, either way, at the end of the day, that ended up being a huge turning point in the game for Georgia. Obviously, not just because Tre Phelps hit a go-ahead home run, but it just completely turned the game upside down for Liberty. And from then on, Georgia just really had control and momentum in this game. And yeah, from Wes Johnson's point of view, he was basically saying, like, look, I'm not going to tell our players that they can't, wave at their family. It was kind of like his standpoint there. Again, no matter what you think, Georgia ended up really, really turning this game around after that play.
Yeah, but of course there are going to be two sides to every story. We also heard the other side from Liberty's head coach, Bradley Ricoit, who also made remarks about the ejections. It felt like a lot of people were placing the blame on him for coming out and saying something as soon as Tre started celebrating.
He made remarks to our dugout and looked straight in our dugout. And at the end of the day, I'm going to protect our guys.
What do you say?
I'm not sure. I mean, it's 5,000 people, 3,633 yelling at the top of their lungs. I'm not sure, but obviously it wasn't good. And at the end of the day, my guys know I've got their backs, and I'm going to protect them.
Supposedly his family was above the dugout. Do you think he might have been trying to talk to them?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know if they were. Like, hey, I wasn't the one that ejected him.
Yeah, no.
Right? So I don't know if you're trying to accuse me of doing that, right? We got warned in the first game today when our shortstop got taken out, right? For some reason. And today I'm going to stand up for my players, okay? And if his family was above our dugout, great. They can go back and review it. The umpires can write a report. I'm not going to take the blame for him getting ejected.
Sure.
Right?
Chip, did you have one?
Yeah, I was just going to say, everybody seems to be clear what he said. You're saying what he said. You were quick out of the dugout. What did he say? Nobody could hear in the press box.
Yeah,
that made you so mad.
Right. I'm not going to answer. I'm not getting into this.
What did you make of Coach LaCroix's reaction to this?
Yeah, he was he was very, very visibly frustrated when everything was going down. He left the dugout and was truly, truly irate. He was asked, like, okay, if Tre was waving at his family, what do you think? And basically he just really stuck to the point of, okay, he viewed it as, I'm protecting my players. He didn't like the way Tre was rounding the bases. He didn't like the celebration. They wouldn't get into what Tre said. They were asked a couple times about that. They wouldn't get into what Tre said, or maybe allegedly said, because, we don't know what was said or wasn't said exactly. He wouldn't get into that, but he basically said, like, look, the decision to eject him is not on me. I'm just going to argue my case.
But going back to your initial point that you made, that yes, Tre Phelps gets ejected, but it does seem to change the offensive momentum for Georgia after this. They go up 2-1 after that, finish the game at 6-1. So, being there at Foley Field, how did the crowd momentum change after that happened? Because I saw where the Georgia players had put Tre Phelps's jersey up on top of the dugout, like the Lion King, holding it up for all the world to see. But how did that get the crowd more involved after that?
It got the crowd super, super involved. And it had kind of been a quiet crowd, understandably so, because Georgia could not get anything going on offense, until really that moment. They had one hit, before that happened. It was just, they couldn't get anything going. That big play happens, and it fires up Georgia. It obviously fired up Wes Johnson. It fired up the crowd. And from then on, it was like anytime anybody took a step, the crowd would either boo or cheer. It was just really, it became a super, super lively and just like fiery environment. And catcher Daniel Jackson, who's like been on fire this whole season, he even said, like, yeah, when something like that happens, it's going to fire you up because you're going to want to win that game for your guys.
Yeah, so I'm thinking back to something that Wes Johnson said earlier this week, because obviously the history of early exits that we've seen in the past from the Diamond Dawgs puts a certain internal pressure on the team. Wes Johnson said he wanted his team to remain calm, which up until tonight, that was the case. But the more important thing was to not change their approach headed into this regional. Do you feel like what they accomplished this weekend was an example of what Wes Johnson was trying to set for them earlier this week?
I think for the most part, yes. I think, first of all, hosting a regional does so much. It gives you home field advantage. Georgia's been on a hot streak. That continued through the SEC tournament. And then I think for the most part, it continued in the regional. I think that Georgia has obviously hit home runs all season long. Georgia, they have a program record 165 right now. So something's going right, and it's continuing to go right for Georgia. They continue to hit for power. I mean, that was the big play tonight. It was a home run from Tre Phelps. And then I think also another thing to point out tonight is that Caden Aoki was really good for Georgia. And I think that Georgia set its pitching up for success by being able to rest arms, getting that double bye in the SEC tournament. And I think Caden Aoki, he had runners on in the 5th and 6th, and he ended up getting out of some jams. So I think for Georgia, whether it's offensively, I know it got chaotic, but whether it's offensively or whether it's Caden Aoki's performance tonight, I think that Georgia should feel pretty good about this regional.
So I think this weekend we saw that Georgia continue with its strength, which is offensive production. We've also learned that maybe pitching isn't as big of a concern heading into the Super Regional as it was this regional. But, it feels like this Georgia team was playing as advertised. But over the course of the last 3 games, did you learn anything about this Diamond Dawg team?
I think I learned, even tonight, I think I learned that Georgia's ability to be, we knew that they were clutch, but I think you're starting to see even more of the fruits of this being a really veteran Georgia team, even when things got chaotic in the game tonight. Wes Johnson has talked a lot about how this is an older Georgia team. This is a more experienced group. And, you have to remember, there's a guy like Tre Phelps who he's been around the last 2 years, he even spoke about, we felt like we should have taken a guy like Charlie Condon to Omaha, and even last year, Georgia felt like it had, that was very disappointing, to Georgia, and Phelps spoke about that too. So I think he spoke a little bit about how that's fuel to his fire. And I think you're seeing some kind of experience for Georgia too, which is valuable in the postseason.
Well, there's a good chance that this weekend they will face a familiar foe. They will host the Athens Super Regional. They will either play on Friday or Saturday. We are not 100% sure yet, but they're going to face the winner of Mississippi State and Louisiana, who are playing right now as we're filming. If Mississippi State wins, they'll go ahead and move on. If Louisiana wins, they will play another game tomorrow. But going back throughout the course of the season, let's just say it is Mississippi State. Georgia has 4 wins against the Bulldogs so far, including a 5-3 win in the conference tournament. However, all of Georgia's wins have been by 3 runs or less. They played Mississippi State really, really close. And so if it is Mississippi State as the matchup, is it one of those things that maybe there's a little bit of confidence heading into that because you're familiar with that team, or because it's a postseason playoff game, the slate is wiped clean?
It's a really, really good question. And I think my answer is we'll see, because how in sports we always say, oh my goodness, it's really hard to beat someone twice in one season. Really, really hard to beat someone, 5 times, more than 5 times. Like that's really, really tough, because Georgia actually went to Starkville and swept Mississippi State. That's the first time that it's done that. Swept a series in Starkville since 2004, and it was the first time Georgia had swept a top 5 road series since 1990. So that was a big, big moment for Georgia, and I think that was when this Georgia team started to realize, shortstop Colby Branch has talked about this a lot, another veteran guy, this Georgia team does well when it's threatened. And that's why you saw them do so well in SEC road series. Even against like top ranked teams, you saw them go into other people's places and do really well. That's just like how they thrive. And then, in the SEC tournament, Georgia just cleaned up, faced Mississippi State. Ended up, winning that tournament for the first time in school history. So honestly, the jury's out on that. My personal opinion is, that's tough. That's a really big challenge. But I do think, to your point, they've played them in Starkville, and then they've played them in Hoover. So now you get to play them at home. And so I do think that maybe wipes the slate clean a little bit, or just offers a totally, totally different dynamic. And that could really help Georgia.
Okay, so to round this conversation out, it feels like Georgia already took a step from where they were last year and being able to get through the Athens regional, but now we're seeing top seeded teams not make it out. So has the expectation at all changed for what this Georgia team can do? Or based on what you saw this weekend, is this a team that should make the College World Series?
I think Georgia can definitely make the College World Series. I think Georgia has shown that it can beat Mississippi State. It's shown that multiple times. Now there's the added challenge of you got to do it again, and that's just a really, really unique thing in sports. So I think it's going to be, you could maybe say it's a more unique path. It's like a difficult path because you've faced this team so many times. It's like, are there any kind of, does that affect your, mentality at all? But I do think this is a Georgia team that's capable of beating Mississippi State and, advancing to the College World Series. But is there a unique element there? Of course, and that's something that they'll have to really focus on and tackle. But I think this Georgia team wants Omaha, and I think it's capable of Omaha. You just have kind of a unique hurdle in front of you, but you get to do it at home, which helps.
Yeah, so they have Omaha in their sights, but first they're going to have to tackle one more person in the Athens Super Regional. That will take place this weekend. I want to thank Sarah so much for joining us from Athens. Make sure to check out DawgNation.com for all of Sarah's baseball coverage, as well as our DawgNation YouTube page for more. With that, we hope to see you in Athens this weekend. As always, thank you, DawgNation.